special milestone and a really proud day for Ford India because it's not every day that you cross 1 million cars that you've delivered to happy customers. Anurag Mehrotra and team would certainly be feeling that pride today. Hi Anurag, good to see you.
Good to see you too, and it is.
What an occasion. I mean, special one for sure.
Absolutely, and it's such a privilege to get a chance to serve over 1 million customers. Everyone from the dealers, employees, present and past, I think each and every one of them have contributed for making sure that we got to this milestone. I mean, there's a certain amount of energy now, over the last 2 years from whatever we've been executing, and we'll talk about that. But first things first, absolute privilege and honor to get a chance to serve over 1 million customers.
How's the journey been, and has the first half been quicker, the second half been, I'm sure you have all those numbers down now. So.
Yeah, it is. I think we've started 1996, 98 in different forms with the joint venture with Mahindra, and slow, steady start, I would say. But the big pivot, so to speak, came with the Figo in 2010. As you know, that's when we entered the volume market. And since then, it's the phase 2 of our growth was 2013 with the EcoSport, and now getting the fundamentals set for the next wave of volume growth that we will see coming for our dealers and our staff. I think between the 1 million, there's roughly about 400 odd thousand EcoSport, 250 odd thousand of Figos, and then about 150 of Icon and the Fiesta. So each, right? And the beauty is that if you look at all the 4 really successful products in the portfolio, all the 4 of them have stood for the fun to drive dynamics, which all of you always insisted that we do not let go of. So fun to drive, and of course safety has always been known with the Ford brand.
Look, there's so much that comes straight from everything you've just said. Let me start sort of one piece at a time. This, of course, is the newest baby, and so
yes,
you'll
absolutely
hope for a big contribution, I know, going forward, but still too new to really count. I know the 1 millionth car that you delivered today was a freestyle. It's been a few days now. What's your sense on how the market's received it?
I think it's been fantastic. I mean, April, when we introduced the product to all of you, we said that this product stands for cool, capable and connected. Cool in the form of just how beautiful it looks, capable in the form of just the ground clearance, the safety attributes in the product, the ARP, the active rollover prevention, and the touchscreen was the connected element of it. And the touchscreen has been rated by all of you as one of the best in the sub 10 lakh category. So all of those elements considered, the product's doing really well. It's getting pretty close to the EcoSport numbers, which speaks volumes for. So we had a bet with one of your peer group members on how much volume it will do, and probably we beat the person down, hands down. So it's really good to see the traction that's coming through. But the more interesting thing for me personally has been the journey that we've been on over the last 2 years on making sure that we deliver a sustainable, profitable business for India. And that was really centered around 4 fundamental strategic pillars. And the proof point of that is this new baby, right? The 4 proof points, so the 4 strategic pillars were strong brand, right product, competitive cost, and effective scale. And I'm really happy that those strategic pillars have now started to bear fruit for us.
From an environment or an economy point of view, there was a few green shoots, a lot of promise that we saw at the start of the year, first quarter of the calendar, and then it hasn't quite measured up in the second quarter. A lot of worries persist. Of course, a lot of those you can't control. I get that, but is that something that continues to worry you as we now start to get towards at least turning our direction towards the festive period?
I think there are. I mean, you've used this term cautious optimism. A lot of people use that word, but it really stems from the fact that yes, the inflation is going up, but it's still within the 4 to 6% band that the RBI was comfortable with. Having said that, there are some really good signs as well. You look at the IIP, you look at the core infrastructure index, you look at the overall macroeconomic fundamentals, they seem to be heading in the right direction. PMI index is another great surrogate for consumer sentiment. But at the same time, we need to ensure that the inflation doesn't go out of hand. The crude price is coming at us quite rapidly. The exchange rates are kind of playing truant. We also have to watch out for how the political environment kind of shapes up and what the implications of that is going to be on the reforms. But having said all of that, I think the going in assumption, at least the counsel we've got from all the economists, is that the 7 to 7.5% seems fairly reasonable to assume for GDP growth, and that should augur well for the industry to grow between the 9 to 11% range. And that, quite honestly, will put India clearly amongst one of the fastest growing markets. Now it's up to us as individual OEMs on how we can capitalize on it through the strategies that each one of us may have.
What about input pressures in terms of, actual costs for manufacturing? I mean, you've recently had a price hike as well. Is that across the board, the price hike?
Yeah, we've done it across the board
About
right
3%
now.
is what I saw, I think.
So it ranges from 1 to 3%. So the input costs are, one is clearly, like I mentioned, the exchange rate does play an effect on us. And the mitigation strategy is going to be more localization. You've seen that with Figo, first gen, 65-70% localization first off. Now it's about 85%. And the next gen products will actually have an even higher percentage of localization. I think the exchange rates, and then the second is just the commodity prices, whether it's steel, aluminum and so on. We've seen some pressure on that, and that's what we've translated. We could take a hit up to a point, but after that we've had to pass it on to the consumers. The good news is we haven't seen the impact in terms of consumer demand. The flow of inquiries, footfalls continues to be strong, with very little, so to speak, discount on the marketplace, or negative pricing, if I can use that word.
But how optimistic does that make you then for the festive season? Are you expecting a huge bump up in sales and just volumes terms?
Yeah, I think the way we are, the good news is the way we are.
Appreciate question.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's been set up for us is, right now we are running both Chennai and Sanand at about 95% plus manned capacity utilization. So we are nicely set up to be able to build more volume if required. But at the same time, we want to ensure that we don't let production get out of hand from demand. That's something that's going to be really, really critical. So we are keeping a good watch. We know that festival season, typically the SAR factors tend to be much stronger in the second half than the first half. And we are very optimistic that it will be stronger than first half for sure.
Other markets asking for this car, I mean, we talked about it at the launch, so
That's right.
where does that stand now?
Yeah, absolutely. You've been to many of the auto shows. We displayed this even in Europe. Steve Armstrong spoke quite a lot about that product. So it's going to, much like EcoSport, this too will go to about 50 odd markets, starting with Europe and some of the other emerging markets around the world.
And what sort of volume do you expect? When does it kick off?
So the exports have already begun. The volume is clearly a function of the demand that we see coming from there. But at this point of time, like I said, if we are running 62 jobs an hour at 95% plus manned capacity utilization, I think we're doing well.
Okay. But obviously the bulk of it would still be for domestic consumption.
Domestic, that's right. So to begin with, it's going to be largely India, and then as the export markets come onto the launch phase, exports will take in.
3 of your portfolio products are going in for life cycle updates, I know, later this year, maybe early next year. How crucial or relevant is that for you? Because, of course, we've seen a flagging on all 3 nameplates, given the fact that they've been around a while.
I think the Figo, Aspire and the Endeavour, all 3 of them are going to see the facelift, much like the cycle plan typically kind of augments. The good news is we are extremely committed to making sure that the aging of the products is always sub 3 years. So we are today at about 2.9 and we believe that's a healthy place to be. It is, if you look at some of our competitors, we are probably one of the youngest portfolio in the market. And we believe that promise will continue to hold, especially given the fact that 75% of the buyers are first-time car buyers. So we're really excited about bringing products and powertrains which consumers really love and want. So in the Freestyle, for example, the new transmission and the new petrol engine, we call it internally the Dragon, but it's got phenomenal response. And I'm sure the consumers, when they get to experience that in the new Aspire and Figo, will absolutely appreciate that.
What's your take from what consumers are telling you now in terms of this whole supposed shift away from diesel back to petrol? Is that enough yet to call it that, or?
I think the shift is real, right? I mean, you've been around for decades now. You've seen the ups and downs that the mixes go through. I remember Figo in 2010 when we first launched it, there was a heavy diesel mix. then it moved to petrol, then it moved again to diesel. So sometimes it's very difficult to predict out, but the team does a really good job of trying to look within the programming cycle what's the right mix to call so that you can meet the demand. Today, for example, on the Freestyle, about 60% of the demand is sitting on the petrol side, which is very similar to where the segment is, whereas on the EcoSport about 70% is diesel. And it's a very different kind of a consumer set, very different driving patterns, and that also leads to the kind of demand that you see on the floor.
And are you getting demand for automatic?
Oh yeah, we are. I mean, I remember your team was very vocal about the fact that we should be looking at bringing the automatic. I think that Manish and team from our India product development are looking at it very seriously. As soon as the business case is proves out, we will be more than happy to bring it in.